Last night was the climactic final night of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And as is typical, the presidential candidate who is nominated gave a speech laying out her vision and her campaign. Now, it just so happens that the presidential candidate, the nominee of the Democratic Party in this upcoming election, is none other than Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris is somebody that we have studied extensively here. I wrote a book that has now sold over 3,000 copies. My book on Kamala Harris that was a sensation as soon as they decided to ban it from Amazon. I published it in 2020, but they banned it from Amazon, and so I republished it on Lulu, and then I republished it, and we distributed over 1,000 copies of it this week. And so I've been studying Kamala Harris for a long time, and having studied Kamala Harris and her career and her family background, etc., I have some insights into her speech and what she's really said and what she really means that other people may not have. So we are going to just go over her speech tonight. We're just going to go over it point by point. We're going to listen to it here. And I'm going to tell you what you're missing. I'm going to decode Kamala Harris's speech. I am going to let you in on the details that you may not have. I'm going to basically give you the inside scoop on Kamala Harris's late night primetime speech. Here we go.
Thank you. Please. Thank you. Please. Thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, let's get to business. Let's get to business. All right. So let me start by thanking my most incredible husband, Doug, for being an incredible partner to me, an incredible father to Cole and Ella, and happy anniversary, Dougie. I love you so very much. To our President Joe Biden, when I think about the path that we have traveled together, Joe, I am filled with gratitude. Your record is extraordinary, as history will show, and your character is inspiring. And Doug and I love you and Jill and are forever thankful to you both.
Now, she's just lying here. As I showed in my book, Joe Biden did everything he could to prevent Kamala Harris from being his vice presidential nominee. He set a date, and once that date was announced, he still didn't have a VP named. And then Kamala Harris was listed on the schedule of the 2020 Democratic Convention separate from the VP nominee. Then she unfollowed him on Twitter, and then at the last minute, Biden announced her as his running mate. The White House and the vice presidential office do not get along. And I mean, it's just absolutely a lie that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden get along. And in fact, Seymour Hersh, the very well-respected journalist, revealed that the reason that Kamala Harris is the nominee is because she got together the rest of the executive branch of the cabinet, and they threatened Joe Biden with the 25th Amendment, that if every member of the cabinet signs on, a president can be forced out of office. So they threatened to force Joe Biden out of office with the 25th Amendment by having every single member of the cabinet vote him out, basically. And so in exchange for that, for her not doing that, he agreed to drop out of the race. So the idea that Kamala and Joe Biden are good friends, good buddies, that is bull honking, right? Kamala forced her way into the vice presidential seat. Kamala forced her way into the nomination by threatening to humiliate Joe Biden by removing him from office, having him be the first president ever removed from office, right? Nixon resigned, but he would be the first president ever removed from office. So that part there just doesn't match reality. She is lying through her teeth, which is something that Kamala has absolutely no problem doing. And we'll talk about that later. But the idea that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are friendly with each other, respect each other, false.
And to Coach Tim Walz, you are going to be an incredible vice president. And to the delegates and everyone who has put your faith in our campaign, your support is humbling. So, America, the path that led me here in recent weeks was no doubt unexpected. But I'm no stranger to unlikely journeys. So, my mother, our mother, Kamala Harris, had one of her own. And I miss her every day, and especially right now. And I know she's looking down, smiling. I know that.
Now, what's weird about this opening part is that Kamala talks about her mother endlessly. All right, her mother is a saint. Her mother can do no wrong. Her mother overcame huge amounts of hardship and difficulties. What's weird, what's very weird, is that Kamala, who almost never speaks of her father, is going to speak of her father in an actually semi-positive light, which is very odd. And that is going to be the weirdest thing coming up. And I think it had a lot to do with a lot of things, but we'll get to that. But the first part about idealizing her mother and all of that, there's nothing new there.
So my mother was 19 when she crossed the world alone, traveling from India to California with an unshakable dream to be the scientist who would cure breast cancer. When she finished school, she was supposed to return home to a traditional arranged marriage. But as fate would have it, she met my father, Donald Harris, a student from Jamaica. They fell in love and got married, and that act of self-determination made my sister Maya and me. Growing up, we moved a lot. I will always remember that big Mayflower truck packed with all our belongings, ready to go to Illinois, to Wisconsin, and wherever our parents' jobs took us. My early memories of our parents together are very joyful ones. A home filled with laughter and music, Aretha, Coltrane, and Miles. At the park, my mother would say, "Stay close," but my...
Now, this is very interesting, and this part is a specific reference to something.
Father would say, as he smiled, "Run, Kamala, run. Don't be afraid. Don't let anything stop you."
Now, that is very, very odd, right? She rarely ever speaks of Donald Harris. The two of them are estranged from each other. They don't like each other. He denounced her 2020 presidential campaign. And when he denounced her 2020 presidential campaign, he wrote an essay called Reflections of a Jamaican Father. And in that essay, he actually wrote about this. And what Kamala just said, that's an answer to this. So this is from his essay, and I quote it in my book, right? His essay didn't get a huge amount of attention, but here it is, right? One of his last memories of Kamala, he said, "Now far away in the diaspora in 2018, one of the most vivid and fondest memories I have of that early period with my children is the visit we made in 1970 to Orange Hill. We trudged through the cow dung and rusted iron gates, uphill and downhill, along narrow, unkempt paths to the very end of the family property, all in my eagerness to show the girls the terrain over which I had wandered daily for hours as a boy, with Miss Crishy hollering in the distance, "You better come home now, boy, or else." And he's talking about his homeland of Jamaica. And he's talking about, in his homeland of Jamaica, he's talking about what it was like to take Kamala there. And in the essay, he says, upon reaching the top of the hill, of the little hill that opened much terrain to our full view, Kamala, ever the adventurous and assertive one, suddenly broke from the pack, leaving behind Maya, the more cautious one, and took off like a gazelle in Serengeti, leaping over rocks and shrubs, fallen branches in utter joy and unleashed curiosity to explore the same enticing terrain. I followed quickly with my trusted Canon Super 8 camera to record the moment. Now, if you go and read Reflections of a Jamaican Father, which I quote extensively in my book, that section of the essay is almost heartbreaking, because you can tell Kamala Harris's father, Donald Harris, despite the fact that his daughter is against everything he stands for, despite the fact that she locked up poor people, despite the fact that she disrespected her Jamaican heritage and that she loathes him and blames him for all of her family's hardships, he still is her father. He still loves her. He still thinks of her that way. And when he described her as the adventurous and assertive one, right, he was basically telling us in a subtle way that his daughter is power hungry, that his daughter will do anything to get ahead, right? The adventurous and assertive one. Suddenly, he's very subtle in this essay. Now, this essay also, it hints at some other things. And you can read my book. There's a couple other little codes in the essay, little coded remarks in this essay, in Reflections of a Jamaican Father that I quote in my book on Kamala Harris. But basically, it appears that because I wrote this book and they made the mistake of banning this book from Amazon, and then my book exploded and was all over Jimmy Dore and was all over InfoWars and all of that, because of that, they felt a need to kind of answer it. So this is Kamala trying to say that she does love her dad on some level, that she does have a relationship with her father on some level, right? And she's even dog whistling the line about her being assertive and running. It's very interesting that she chose to do this. Now, as this goes on, you're going to see, when Donald Trump said that Kamala Harris, he didn't realize she was black, he thought she was Indian, right? That is a punch in the gut that Kamala Harris has to deal with, because Kamala Harris wants to be the first black female president of the United States. She wants to be a black woman. And instead, she is a woman of Jamaican, Caribbean, and Indian descent who's estranged from her Jamaican father, who spent her career locking up and imprisoning black people, and doing so in a vindictive, cruel, and sadistic way. And we're going to get into that later, because she just completely glosses over her career as a prosecutor in this speech. But Kamala Harris really needs to convince you that she is a black woman, and that she spends the next chunk of the speech doing that, in kind of a cringe way. And so we'll go through that.
From my earliest years, he taught me to be fearless. But the harmony between my parents did not last. When I was in elementary school, they split up. And it was mostly my mother who raised us. Before she could finally afford to buy a home.
Yeah. And it was not a friendly divorce. In her autobiography, she describes how at her high school graduation, she was so afraid that her mother wouldn't show up simply because her father was there. Right? She knew that her father would be in the audience at her high school graduation. So she was terrified that her mother wouldn't show up because of it. and that when her mother actually showed up, even though her father was there, she was moved. Now, if her mother was so angry and hateful towards her father that she would not show up for her, there was a danger she wouldn't show up for her her daughter's graduation because of it. That is not a friendly divorce, right? And we don't know the details. We do know that Kamala blamed Donald for what went on in her family, that she sees herself as a victim, that her family struggled economically, and her father became kind of the scapegoat. Now, we don't know exactly what happened. It is interesting that in his essay, Reflections of a Jamaican Father, he references different things. I'm not going to get into detail about it. You can read my book, but he drops some hints, right? He talks about how he wishes that Kamala had met some of the women, the Jamaican women, strong women that were key in his life. And he says some other things. So there's some little hints there, but Kamala Harris was not raised by her father. Kamala Harris loathes her father. Her father lost custody of her, and he believes that racist stereotypes about black men and Caribbeans were used, that he says the courts saw him as a Negro from the islands who might eat his daughters for breakfast, and that's why he was not able to raise his daughters. If you read his essay, Reflections of a Jamaican Father, he speaks painfully about how the stereotypes about Caribbean men as pot-smoking joy seekers and all that was used to take his ability to raise his two daughters away. And that's why he denounced her campaign, because she invoked those stereotypes when she appeared on The Breakfast Club. They asked her if she ever smoked marijuana, and she said, "Half my family's from Jamaica. What do you think?" And that hurt Donald Harris on a very personal level because of the fact that, those stereotypes are what prevented him from seeing his daughter. So from here, Kamala now starts telling us about all these black people that were key in raising her, right? Just like she's trying to make it sound like she doesn't hate her father, right? They read this book. They've watched my interviews, right? I have it on good authority that this book was sitting in her office as vice president, long before this election. I mean, it was sitting in the vice presidential office and a stack of books in 2020. So, they know about this book. And then when my book blew up, I think they were hoping that by banning me from Amazon, they would somehow help Kamala. But my book blew up, and it was all over social media and everything that my book had been banned. I started selling it on Gumroad and on Lulu. Amazon gave up and just put it right back up. And now my book is selling on Amazon. I'm selling like loads of them every day. People are reading it. So this was her trying to pretend she doesn't hate her black father, because Donald Trump has come out with, "You're not really black, you're Indian." And she did make her career by locking up black people, and she is completely estranged. You'll notice that her 85-year-old father, who is alive, was not in the audience tonight. He wasn't at her inauguration as vice president, right? She hates her dad, and she blames her dad for all of her problems, and she thinks she was a victim of her dad. That little girl was me, etc. But let's continue.
Rented a small apartment in the East Bay. In the Bay, you either live in the hills or the flatlands. We lived in the flats. A beautiful working-class neighborhood of firefighters, nurses, and construction workers.
And this is also where some people are pointing out, if you look at where she lived, especially she spent her high school years in Montreal, Canada. She never talks about what it was like living in Montreal. She never talks about her high school experiences. Very little does she ever talk about them. But the area she was living in was a very fancy, luxurious, wealthy area. Kamala wants you to think that it's a rags to riches story, and it is not a rags to riches story. I mean, her mother comes from a very wealthy family in India. Her father, I mean, is descended from one of the wealthiest plantation owners and slave owning families in Jamaica. And her father, I mean, her father's family owns huge tracts of land in Jamaica and stuff. I mean, she is not from some impoverished background. Okay. And the area that she lived in, Montreal, is a very, very wealthy area, according to the information I'm getting now. But she wants to tell you it's a rags to riches story. And now she's going to start listing off Black people that were influential in her childhood in order to convince you that she is a Black poor person.
All who tended their lawns with pride. My mother, she worked long hours. And like many working parents, she leaned on a trusted circle to help raise us. Mrs. Shelton.
Yeah. Your mother had servants, is what is the case, right? You were raised by paid servants because your mother was from a wealthy family in India and was, employed doing, medical work. I mean, no. I mean, let's continue.
Ran the daycare below us and became a second mother. Uncle Sherman, Aunt Mary, Uncle Freddie, Auntie Chris. None of them family by blood, and all of them family by love.
Yeah. Now, I mean, are these real people she's mentioning? I mean, I assume they are. I have no reason to think they're not real people. It is interesting that, the names she's giving, it's almost like stereotypical, right? I mean, she's basically telling her audience in response to Donald Trump accusing her of not being Black. I'm Black. I have an Uncle Sherman. I have an Uncle Freddie. I mean, it's a little cringe, but whatever. I mean, she could be telling the truth, right? We don't know.
Family who taught us how to make gumbo,
my point stands.
to play chess, and sometimes even let us win. Family who loved us, believed in us, and told us we could be anything and do anything. They instilled in us the values they personified: community, faith, and the importance of treating others as you would want to be treated, with kindness, respect, and compassion. My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. And
now, watch her facial expressions here. Watch her facial expressions here.
As the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her. But
take a look.
My mother never lost her cool.
Ooh.
She was tough.
Take a look at this.
Courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health, and she taught Maya and me.
Now, she's practiced keeping it under control here, keeping her cool. But look at this. She's talking about her mother and how tough the world was to her mother. And the anger is coming out, right? The rage that drives Kamala, the vengeance that she wants against the world, it all comes out, right? Look at the facial expressions here. Again, she's practiced with her team, keeping it under control. Don't show the world how angry you are. Don't show the world that little girl was you. Don't do it. Don't do it. But look, she can't cover it up. This is a hateful, vengeful person.
But my mother never lost her cool.
Look at the eyes.
She was tough.
She was tough.
Courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health. And she taught Maya and me a lesson that
she backs away from it there, but there's a lot of hate underneath that, and you will see that later. We'll wait till we get to the part with her talking about being a prosecutor.
Michelle mentioned the other night. She taught,
and that you see that fake smile. She's thinking, "Keep it under control, Kamala. Keep it under control." Right? That big smile that she's practiced is, with her fake laugh and all of that.
5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent.
Right? And then she's cracking up in her voice there, right? Brown woman with an accent. And then she's starting, there's pain there.
And as the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her.
Ooh, and here Here it comes.
But my mother never lost her cool. She was tough, courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health.
She's breathing it in. She's trying to get control.
Maya and me a lesson.
And then a fake smile. Got to keep control. That forced laugh. That fake smile.
Michelle mentioned the other.
She's doing her fake laugh that she's supposed to do whenever she gets angry. Right? See that the big teeth. I'm not angry.
She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it. Do something about it. That was my mother. And she taught us, and she also taught us, and never do anything half-assed. And that is a direct quote. A direct quote. I grew up immersed in the ideals of the civil rights movement. My parents had met at a civil rights gathering, and they made sure that we learned about civil rights leaders, including the lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, those who battled in the courtroom to make real the promise of America. So at a young age, I decided I wanted to do that work. I wanted to be a lawyer. And when it came time to choose the type of law I would pursue, I reflected on a pivotal moment in my life.
Now, this is interesting here. Now, either, they're coming up, there are a huge amount of references to child molesting, sexual predators, sexual abuse in this speech. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily a reflection of Kamala Harris' mental illness. I think this is an intentional tactic. She's trying to trigger her audience, right? We have to vote for Kamala Harris because Donald Trump is a rapist, is an evil predator, sex man, is an evil man, rapist, whatever. We have to vote for her. And that's their argument, right? Is that Donald Trump is a sex pervert or whatever. And we have to vote for her. Because if not, the sex pervert men are just going to come get you. She's trying to trigger people in her audience who have been abused, people in her audience who have been sexually assaulted, people who in her audience who have been raped. She's trying to trigger them. And so it's interesting that this speech has some references, so many references to child molesting and sexual assault and predators and stuff. And my theory is either this is part of Kamala's pathology, that little girl was me, she's the victim, etc., or she's just trying to trigger her audience, which honestly, it could just be that she's trying to trigger her audience, right? There's a whole internet culture that has been created, around, I don't want to go into great detail, but there's a whole internet culture of people triggering each other constantly about molesters, and everyone's a rapist and everyone's a pedophile and everyone's all of it, and that there's TV shows and true crime, and there's a whole genre that is very, very popular, with men and women out there that just kind of focuses on the gory details of sexual assault and the gory details of rape and sexual predators and axe murderers and serial killers and all of that, right? And that there is a very large section of our population that goes into that space for whatever reason. True crime podcasts, flip the channels on cable television, right? And there's a certain section of our population that has just decided to trigger themselves around those kinds of issues. And that just is something that they think about all day long. And in some cases it might be that they're trying to, they had an experience like this and they're trying to kind of rewrite it, right? They're trying to rewrite their own trauma. In other cases, who knows what's going on there, but the fact that there are so many references to this in this speech, I think that's not so much Kamala's own crazy as it is intentional by the speech writers to try and speak to the large sections of the people watching it that fixate on that issue, have, subconscious triggers around that issue, She was trying to make her audience afraid and make them uncomfortable, in a kind of a nasty subconscious way. That's my main theory. It could just be part of her, her victim complex, but we shall see. But that's, take this next part with a grain of salt, right? She didn't have to go here. She did go here. And it doesn't just come up once. It comes up over and over and over again in the speech. Predators, all of this stuff. And something's going on there. Something's going on there that isn't good, whether it's an intentional manipulation of the audience or it's just Kamala's crazy. It's not good. It's not a good sign, right? If you're accepting the nomination for president of the United States, you shouldn't be referencing sexual assault and child molesting and sexual abuse and predators so many times in your speech. But that kind of fits with the t-shirts with 10-year-old Kamala on it. And that kind of fits with That Little Girl Was Me. And there's some unhealthy stuff going on all throughout the Kamala Harris campaign. And it very much, I was kind of making that point in the book. It's about a lot more than just Kamala Harris. It's about wokeism. It's about victimology. It's about the way our politics has become a cringe fest. And that's what this speech is. This speech is cringe and will continue.
You see, when I was in high school, I started to notice something about my best friend, Wanda. She was sad at school. And there were times she didn't want to go home. So one day I asked if everything was all right. And she confided in me that she was being sexually abused by her stepfather. And I immediately told her she had to come stay with us, and she did. This is one of the reasons I became a prosecutor.
Now, is this true or not? I don't know. It's weird how many references to this there are in the speech.
To protect people like Wanda, because I believe everyone has a right to safety, to dignity, and to justice.
Yeah, well, that's not what you did as a prosecutor. You preyed on people like Wanda. You destroyed the lives of low-income people, low-income parents, etc. And we'll get to that later. But, that sounds great. That sounds so great, Kamala. You just protected the downtrodden. That's not what your record shows, but let's continue.
When I had a case, I charged it not in the name of the victim, but in the name of the people. For a simple reason. In our system of justice, a harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. And I would often explain this to console survivors of crime, to remind them no one should be made to fight alone. We are all in this together. And every day.
Now, what about those people who had false positive drug test results, that went to jail because of false positive drug test results, and you covered it up and didn't reveal it, and they went to jail? Because you covered up, because you wanted to lock people up. How about Kevin Cooper, who almost got the death penalty? In
the courtroom, I stood proudly before a judge, and I said 5 words: Kamala Harris for the people. And to be clear, my entire career, I've only had one client, the people.
That's right. She never represented people that were accused. She never stood up to the police or all of that. She was always representing the government, persecuting low-income people, preying on people who can't defend themselves, playing up stereotypes. Let's talk about what Kamala Harris for the people, her career as a prosecutor. We have video evidence. This is her own words. This is her.
That with the swipe of my pen, I could charge someone with the lowest level offense.
She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
So I learned at a very young age the power. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. The power. Well, This was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my reelection. And because of the swipe of my pen, that person could be arrested. They could sit in jail for at least 48 hours. The power.
She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor.
As a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick.
The power. They could lose time from work and their family maybe lose their job. They'd have to come out of their own pocket to help hire a lawyer. They'd lose standing in their community. All because of the swipe of my pen.
Usually the job comes with a badge.
The power.
And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. And I have a huge stick.
The power. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
And I have a huge stick.
So I learned at a very young age the power.
Held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail.
The power.
Yes, we achieved intended effect.
The power. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
And I have a huge stick.
When you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Yeah. When she was prosecutor, and what you just saw her laughing about is that she jailed parents because their kids missed school. And this is not getting anywhere near the attention it should get. This single mom with a special needs child was put in handcuffs because of Kamala Harris. That policy that she bragged about, prosecuting parents for truancy. It resulted in some really horrendous things for low-income people. She wasn't fighting big corporations. She wasn't fighting, ultra monopolies. She was fighting poor people because that's what criminal prosecutors do. And she was better at it because the juries that might not have trusted a white prosecutor thought she was a black woman while she did it. Right. She also, really benefited from the fact that she was the mistress of Willie Brown. And that's a whole nother story. But yes, this video that I just showed you needs to be seen by everyone. Right. It needs to be seen by everyone. The video that I just showed about Kamala Harris for the people and what, her bragging about the power that she had as a prosecutor to destroy people's lives people need to see that video. So please tweet out this video if you get a chance, right? Take the time to tweet this video out. Everyone needs to see this, right? And the Trump campaign is trying to please different people right now. They've got a lot of law enforcement who support them and all of that. So they're sending the wrong message. The story of Kamala Harris is not that she was a soft on crime prosecutor. It's that she was a sadist who enjoyed destroying the lives of low-income people. But anyway, we'll continue with the video.
And so, on behalf of the people, on behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, on behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, on behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another. On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And with this election, our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred.
Yeah, there's a lot of just platitudes in this speech. And when she starts talking about foreign policy, it gets very neocon. It becomes almost a Bush speech, but let's continue.
Power. I will be a president who unites us around our highest aspirations.
I am a uniter, not a divider.
And listens, who is realistic, practical, and has common sense, and always fights.
She's basically just George W. Bush, right? And especially when she starts talking foreign policy, it's particularly nuts. But, you know, she's a uniter, not a divider. Her story is only possible in America. In no other country in the world do people rise up in their social position. Social mobility only happens in America. And
children against predators who abuse them.
Yep.
As Attorney General of California,
predators who abuse them, and she's bringing that up quite a bit tonight. I'm just telling you, she's a lot of talk about sexual abuse and sexual predators in this speech.
Took on the big banks.
No, you didn't.
Delivered $20 billion for middle-class families who faced foreclosure, and helped pass a homeowner bill of rights, one of the first of its kind in the nation. I stood up for veterans and students being scammed by big for-profit colleges, for workers who are being cheated out of their wages, the wages they were due, for seniors facing elder abuse. I fought against the cartels who traffic in guns and drugs and human beings.
More references to human traffickers and pedophiles and sex trafficking and sexual abuse, and it's very odd.
Of our border and the safety of our communities. And I will tell you, these fights were not easy, and neither were the elections that put me in those offices. We were underestimated at practically every turn. But we never gave up, because the future is always worth fighting for. And that's the fight we are in right now, a fight for America's future. Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious.
This is where it gets ridiculous.
Consider not only the chaos and calamity when he was in office, but also the gravity of what has happened since he lost the last election. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When
Now this is amusing. So first of all, right, the doors to the Capitol were left open, and all those people thought they were allowed to go in. Number one. Number two, assaulted police officers. Now, first of all, there's all kinds of video of the police acting as their tour guides and just leading these people around the Capitol. They thought they were allowed to be there. But second of all, did that ever happen at any Black Lives Matter rally? Did that ever happen at any Stop Trump demonstration? I mean, come on. Right? And again, that's what's particularly neocon about this speech, right? I mean, throughout this speech, she's basically calling Donald Trump a communist. You know, she's saying Donald Trump supports violent protesters who don't respect the police. Donald Trump, you know, questions our great country. I mean, you'll see it. This is a neocon speech, right? You know, this is George W. Bush, these crazy protesters out here disrespecting our country, you know, while they're protesting the war. And sometimes they get into shoving matches with our police officers. You know, obviously, you know, we're not for violence or any illegal activity, but it's like, you know, Ferguson burned to the ground. I mean, the Black Lives Matter spring, you know, 2020 and the lead up to the vote that fall. I mean, there was plenty of illegal activity that went on, plenty of law enforcement that you know, battled against protesters, plenty of assaults on law enforcement. I mean, it's not like the only place that's ever happened is on January 6th, but it's odd that that's what she brings up.
In his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help. He did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely...
Actually, Donald Trump did say, go home. He made that whole video saying, folks, go home.
...by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse.
Yep, there you go again, sexual abuse.
Consider what he intends to do if we give him power again.
This is where it gets good.
Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol.
There are people that are in prison now for January 6th who weren't even there on the day. There are people who are in prison on January 6th who did not even go into the Capitol. There are people sitting in prison who, I mean, the insane sentences that have been given out, the idea that all the January 6th defendants are all people that, you know, beat the hell out of cops or something. I mean, that's just doesn't match the details. Go and look at the details of the cases. There are people who are, you know, photographers that went in and filmed the events as they happened, and that they have been jailed. Right? There was an InfoWars reporter who didn't even go into the building; he was just on the scene filming it, and they arrested. He got prison time. I mean, that's the idea that he would pardon those people when we know it's very apparent the FBI was key in letting it happen and the doors were let open. I mean, this is scary stuff, folks.
Intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy.
That's the crazy thing, right? So she said, you know, let's roll it back here. Let's get the whole quote.
Consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy.
Yeah, so jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. Donald Trump was president for 4 years. How many Democrats did Donald Trump imprison? Zero. Right? Donald Trump was president. Democrats were protesting him. Democrats were disrupting his rallies. Zero. Since Biden has taken office, hundreds of Republicans that were part of the January 6th protests have been given astronomical, insane sentences. The People's Democratic Uhuru movement, a group of black socialists, black Marxists, have been indicted for being Russian agents. I'm going to be going to their trial coming up very soon. Their trial will start in federal court. They could get 15 years in prison because they criticized the Biden administration and disagreed with its policies on Ukraine, right? Sue May Terry, who is a Korean American who, has worked with the government of South Korea, and she's been prosecuted and charged under the Foreign Agents Registration Act because the government of South Korea won't play ball with the United States and wants to negotiate with North Korea. In addition to that, the home of Scott Ritter was raided by the FBI. They came into his home and they took all kinds of boxes out of his house. In addition to that, right, you've got Dimitri Simes, another American whose home was raided by the FBI. Biden has been jailed, and then they've even prosecuted Donald Trump himself on bogus charges about classified documents and all kinds of things that were thrown out by the courts. They've even prosecuted Trump himself to try and keep him out of this election. So for her to say, well, Donald Trump might imprison political opposition, her administration, the Biden-Harris administration, is jailing opposition like you wouldn't believe, right? I mean, I'm going to put on, this is what her administration is doing to the Uhuru movement, right? The People's Democratic Uhuru movement, a group of black socialists. They're not on the right. These aren't even conservatives. These are just black socialists that disagree with the Ukraine policy. I mean, this is crazy.
After the rioting was done, U.S. media kind of forgot about those communities. Well, Uhuru, they went out there because they saw black and brown people like themselves that were out there protesting and rioting. And they stayed there, and they've been there since 2014, providing services in the community, giving these young people in the community something constructive to do, not just go out and break shit to raise awareness about the conditions they're in, but ways to actually feed people and serve the community. And they've been there in St. Louis since 2014 doing constructive work. They have really escalated these programs. They have a farmer's market. They provide classes and services to pregnant mothers, and in particular in St. Louis, Missouri, and in St. Petersburg, Florida. They're trying to undo the damage that the U.S. Department of Justice and the state police and the local police and all the forces have been doing in communities like Ferguson, Missouri. And at the same time that they've done this community work, the African People's Socialist Party has also taken a firm anti-imperialist stance. They support China. They support Russia. They support Cuba. They support Iran. And when the United States started piling weapons into Kiev, they defended Russia's right to intervene.
This defensive war in Ukraine that Russia is actually waging against world colonial powers, not Ukraine as a single entity, but the U.S. and all colonial powers who have an interest in colonially dominating African people right here in this country and around the world and extracting resources from the majority of peoples on the planet. That system, this current system, is in severe crisis, and they cannot rule in the same old way.
Because of that, their homes were raided. Then months later, the federal government came out with an indictment, and it's charging them with being Russian agents. And it's trying to allege that the election campaign that they ran in St. Petersburg, Florida, was somehow interference in the U.S. electoral process.
4 activists associated with the People's Democratic Uhuru movement and the African People's Socialist Party have been indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice. The indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice accuses them of spreading Russian propaganda and cites simply some web conferences that they had, some Zoom meetings, some emails they sent out, as well as the fact that they have run routine election campaigns. Is this of concern to the Secretary General as an attack on human rights, freedom of assembly, etc.?
I frankly was not aware of the case before you mentioned it. Let me look into it and I will get back to you.
What's going on in Africa is directly connected to what's going on here. What's going on in Ukraine is connected to what's going on in Harlem. You know what I'm saying? It's an international global economy That's all connected.
Because they go to conferences in Russia, this constitutes Russian meddling in the elections. The whole thing is ridiculous. It's completely, utterly ridiculous. They've been running these campaigns for years, since before I was born. Back in the 1970s, they were running people for office. Their platform of reparations, I mean, Marianne Williamson, she's a major Democrat candidate. She also says she believes in reparations. I mean, it's not a unique message that they have in that sense, but they have been targeted because they're doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, you know, at all of our meetings, we have a picture of Fred Hampton up on the stage because Fred Hampton, he built a free breakfast program. He organized what he called a rainbow coalition, uniting low-income people, white, black, brown, Arab, Latino, into one organization, you know, trying to build up community empowerment, trying to do community service projects while teaching Marxism and socialism. You know, we look at Fred Hampton as a great example of the American revolutionary tradition. And, you know, the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, you know, they don't like that we wave the American flag. They don't like that we consider ourselves patriotic. They have their own kind of unique analysis. They talk about what they call the colonial mode of production. That's not traditional Marxist thinking. And we don't agree with them on a number of issues. But it doesn't matter. We support them.
We all have to stand up and oppose the ideology of division and support an ideology of unity based upon our material interests, you know what I'm saying, to work together.
People who can't understand that, people who can't get past, you know, this or that, like, we got to put aside our differences and say that if they come for them, they come for all of us. If they go after them, they got to deal with all of us. That needs to be the attitude among anti-imperialists.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that she's telling us, oh, Donald Trump might prosecute opposition when she's prosecuting the Uhuru movement right now. She's trying to put a black socialist organization in jail for statements they made about Ukraine. It's absolutely outrageous.
His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself.
Well, the ironic thing is that Donald Trump, as a self-serving politician, will be on the defensive from the moment he takes office. And so that will force him to do popular things, right? I mean, Donald Trump is facing opposition from the establishment. And so in order to stay in office, he's going to have to deliver. He's going to have to deliver the goods.
But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back to when Donald Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare. We are not going back to when he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. We are not going to let him eliminate the Department of Education that funds our public schools.
Yeah, he never called for doing that, right? I mean, you know, the Agenda 2025 thing, he's denounced it. I mean, this is just, you know, and I mean, the Democrats themselves have presided over so much austerity and so much neoliberal cuts in public services. So, yeah, this is absurd.
Forward to a future with a strong and growing middle class, because
there's just so many like bland cliches. I'm for goodness, and I'm for morals, and I'm for righteousness, and I love America. I mean, just so many, there's so lacking in content, this speech. No policy solutions, scary Donald Trump, and you know, look at me, look at my cute immigrant family story.
Is where I come from. My mother kept a strict budget. We lived within our means. Yet we wanted for little, and she expected us to make the most of the opportunities that were available to us and to be grateful for them. Because, as she taught us, opportunity is not available to everyone. That's why we will create what I call an opportunity economy where everyone has the chance to compete and a chance to succeed.
What does that mean? I mean, do we expect her to get up and say, well, I want an economy where nobody can succeed? There's no real meat there. Right now, she's rolled out some interesting economic proposals that sound great about price controls and stuff like that, but none of it's going to happen. But the more desperate she gets, the more that they'll have to lay out like serious economic proposals.
Everyday needs like healthcare and housing and groceries, we will provide access.
How expensive have those things gotten under her?
Entrepreneurs and founders. And we will end America's housing shortage.
We don't have a housing shortage in America. We do not have a housing shortage in America. There are 2-3 houses for every homeless person. The issue is the rent is very high, right?
To Donald Trump, because I think everyone here knows he doesn't actually fight for the middle class. He doesn't actually fight for the middle class. Instead, he fights for himself and his billionaire friends. And he will give them another round of tax breaks that will add up to $5 trillion to the national debt. And all the while, he intends to enact what in effect is a national sales tax, call it a Trump tax, that would raise prices on middle-class families by almost $4,000 a year.
Have you seen the inflation that's taken place under her leadership? How much more the food costs, how much more everything costs. And she's going to tell us, oh, Donald Trump's going to put some tax and he'll make it go up. It's like, have you seen how much things cost now? How working families are being squeezed, right? It's not some tax that's making prices go up. This is ridiculous. She's the queen of inflation.
Cannot truly be prosperous unless Americans are fully able to make their own decisions about their own lives, especially on matters of heart and home.
And what about matters of getting vaccinated? What about matters of what they read on the internet and all of that? What about matters of religion and religious faith and what kind of indoctrination their kids get in school?
Donald Trump handpicked members of the United States Supreme Court to take away reproductive freedom.
Like the one area where they're in favor of your right is to have an abortion. They want big tech companies to decide what you can read. They want you to be forced to get vaccinated. They want you to have your kids to have to go to school and be told that all kinds of insane over the top gender theory, right? And you have nothing to do about it. They want your kids to get transgender surgery without your permission. But on the one issue of abortion, oh my God, they want you to have your freedom.
All because doctors are afraid they may go to jail for caring for their patients. Couples just trying to grow their family, cut off in the middle of IVF treatments. Children who have survived sexual assault.
Here we go. How many times is she mentioning sexual assault? And it continues, folks. She is triggering her audience. I am convinced that this is not Kamala being crazy. This is smart speechwriters trying to trigger her audience.
Essentially being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. This is what's happening in our country.
Right. We couldn't have more people in the country, right? We don't want to increase the population or anything like that, right? We got to...
As a part of his agenda, he and his allies would limit access to birth control, ban medication abortion.
No, they wouldn't. I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't care about you going to the store and buying a condom.
Congress. And get this.
Yeah, Donald Trump is not going to take away your right to buy a condom at the drugstore. Give me a break.
Abortion coordinator. And force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions.
It's not going to happen.
Simply put,
Roe v. Wade
they
was
are out of
overturned,
their
and that was supposed to be the end of the world. And Roe v. Wade's been overturned, and barely anything has changed. So, you know, many of the ultra rich want abortion because they want to decrease the population. And yeah, this is
that they don't trust women. Well, we trust women. We trust women. And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law.
Isn't it crazy how important abortion is to the Democrat Party at this point? I mean, abortion is like their central issue. I mean, I'm pro-choice. I don't think it should be illegal. But is that, I mean, how long did she talk about abortion? How much crazy scaremongering was there about abortion?
Communities and places of worship. The freedom to love who you love openly and with pride. The freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis. And the freedom that unlocks all the others, the freedom to vote. With this election, we finally have the opportunity to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Let me be clear. After decades in law enforcement, I know the importance of safety and security, especially at our border. Last year, Joe and I brought together Democrats and conservative Republicans to write the strongest border bill in decades. The Border Patrol endorsed it. But Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal. Well, I refuse to play politics with our security.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point that John raises there. No one voted for Kamala Harris in the Democratic primary. Joe Biden was the nominee until he was ousted. And they didn't even have debates with Marianne Williamson or with RFK or with any of them. I mean, yeah. Freedom to vote, but not freedom to pick the candidate of your party. There was nobody voted in the Democrat primary for Kamala Harris. Nobody.
Create an earned pathway to citizenship and secure our border. And America, we must also be steadfast in advancing our security and values abroad.
Here we go.
As Vice President, I have confronted threats to our security, negotiated with foreign leaders, strengthened our alliances, and engaged with our brave troops overseas.
Yeah, what foreign leaders has Kamala Harris negotiated with? I must have missed that one. Where has Kamala Harris been negotiating with foreign leaders?
As Commander-in-Chief, I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. And I will fulfill...
She's reassuring the military-industrial complex. No cuts. She will continue to spend billions and billions of dollars on the military, and we'll continue having huge military bases all over the world, right? This right now, this is George W. Bush right now.
Our sacred obligation to care for our troops and their families, and I will always honor and never disparage their service and their sacrifice.
See, there's all these people that are protesting the war, and they hate our troops. They hate our troops. If you disagree with invading Iraq, you're against our troops. You're against our troops. You got to support the troops, right? I mean, do you remember that? I mean, this is a Bush speech. She's giving a George W. Bush speech, right? That was always the big line. If you disagree with U.S. foreign policy, you're disrespecting our troops, right? And she'll never cut the military budget. No, 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 no. We're going to have the biggest, most lethal, huge military in the world.
I will make sure that we lead the world into the future on space and artificial intelligence, that America, not China, wins the competition for the 21st century, and that we strengthen, not abdicate, our global leadership. Trump, on the other hand, threatened to abandon NATO.
Not that! Abandon NATO? Oh my God, what are we going to do if we're abandoning NATO? Oh my God, we don't have a huge military alliance and huge military bases in Germany. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Oh, did Donald Trump threaten to abandon NATO? Oh man, we can't have him. Oh man, we might not be inching closer to World War III with Russia if Trump gets in there. Oh my God.
He encouraged Putin to invade our allies. Said Russia.
I'm sure that's exactly what Putin did. I'm sure that's exactly what Trump did. He called up Putin. He said, "Hey, Putin, Putin, I don't know if you ever thought about invading Ukraine. That would be awesome if you invaded Ukraine. I would do it if I was you. I would totally do it." I mean, this is so ridiculous, right? I mean, she's calling Trump a communist.
Could, quote, do whatever the hell they want. 5 days before Russia attacked Ukraine, I met with President Zelensky to warn him about Russia's plan to invade.
Yeah, and 10 years beforehand, the United States overthrew the Ukrainian government and started piling weapons into there. And the people of of Donbass got bombed and killed for 8 years straight. I mean, it's like, this is ridiculous. This is just completely ridiculous. Oh yeah. I mean, Zelensky had no idea that anything was going on. And then Kamala Harris called him up and said, "I'm going to warn you. I just found out." I mean, it's like, this is so ridiculous.
I helped mobilize a global response, over 50 countries, to defend against Putin's aggression.
Yeah, you were part of an administration that engaged in years of provocations and did everything they could to force Russia into a situation where they felt that they had to go in. And then you've been prolonging this war by piling more and more and more and more weapons in there, and more of our tax money to line the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs.
And as president, I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies.
That's right, right? While America's falling apart and our bridges are crumbling and everything's falling apart, you're going to keep giving billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. I mean, she is declaring loyalty to a global financial system and not the American people.
With respect to the war in Gaza,
this is where it gets great. Remember, we have to vote for her because Donald Trump is so pro-Israel. So continue. I mean, this is, Muslims, Palestinians, anybody, everybody in America who supports Palestine has to support this woman who's literally married to her AIPAC handler.
President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done.
It's funny. You've had since October 7th. At any point, you could just cut off the funding to Israel or just tell Israel no.
And let me be clear. I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself.
Is that what Israel's doing right now? Defending itself? The murder in Gaza that's been going on since October 7th. That's just Israel just defending itself.
And I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself.
Code, you'll keep spending billions of our taxpayer money to arm Israel, and enable Israel to continue to carry out its atrocities. I mean, but we have to vote for her, right? That's what we're being told. Oh my God, you know, Caleb, if you don't want her to win the election, you're a Zionist. No, I'm not.
Because the people of Israel must never again face the horror.
Never again. Did you hear the word never again? She basically used the slogan of the JDL. Never again, right? The Jewish Defense League, the terrorist group that murdered all kinds of Arab Americans, that threatened and assassinated Soviet diplomats, the JDL. They must never again. That was the slogan they used. Never again. Basically, Israel can do whatever it wants because of the Holocaust. She said, never again. She's using the slogan of Meir Kahane and the Jewish Defense League.
A terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7, including unspeakable sexual violence and the
sexual violence, right? Even though the October 7th rape thing has been largely debunked and challenged, but no, she's got to bring up sexual assault and sexual violence. How many references to pedophiles and sexual assault and sexual abuse are there in this speech? I mean, it's some sinister manipulation she's doing. I mean, she's messing with the minds of her audience and manipulating people's trauma.
Massacre of young people at a music festival. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating.
It's devastating. Listen to that language. It's not wrong. It's not immoral. It's not murder. It's not criminal. It's devastating. Geez, you know, I mean, if I shot my neighbor in the face, would that be devastating? I think it would be a crime. But you know, she doesn't call it a crime what Israel's doing.
Innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety.
Yeah, there's no condemnation here of what Israel's doing. She's just describing things that happen. No condemnation, not war crimes, no condemnation whatsoever. Just descriptive words, right? This is pure theater. She is a Zionist. She's married to a very prominent, big supporter of Israel.
Over and over again, the scale of suffering is heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. It's not criminal. It's not murderous. It's not genocide.
President Biden and I are working to end this war.
You can do it with a stroke of your pen, Kamala.
That Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Meaningless words.
To defend our forces and our interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists. I will not
See, there you go, right? It's all the fault of Iran-backed terrorists, the Houthis that are standing up for the Palestinian people. She's beating the podium against Iran. Somehow it's all Iran's fault that the people of the Middle East are opposing Israel.
Up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump.
Right. Why was it a bad thing for Donald Trump to meet with Kim Jong-un? Why was it a bad thing to open the door to peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula? Right? She is attacking Donald Trump for trying to make peace on the Korean Peninsula, which is something that the South Korean government has already announced that they're for. And the U.S. government is targeting sympathizers of South Korea. Sumi Terry, who's married to Max Boot, has been prosecuted at this point. They're calling her a foreign agent. They're trying to crush the hope for peace on the Korean Peninsula.
At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. Freedom and self-determination. Necessary to defend our forces and our interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists. I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are...
Yeah, never try to work for peace on the Korean Peninsula. How dare Donald Trump sit down with the leader of North Korea? We can't possibly work toward peace. We can't possibly bring the American troops home in South Korea home. We can't possibly see a nation divided move toward reconciliation. I mean, this is disgusting here. I mean, you know, it's like she's promising to be a war president. She's promising to send weapons to Israel. She's promising to send weapons to Ukraine. She's promising to keep the Korean Peninsula divided and keep U.S. troops in the Korean Peninsula and not work for peace on the Korean Peninsula. She is basically announcing that she is opposed to peace.
Rooting for Trump, who are rooting for Trump. Because, you know, they know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself.
This is just silliness, right? This is just absolute silliness.
And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand, and I know where the United States belongs.
Yeah, ask the Uhuru movement about that. Ask the Uhuru movement about that. Ask Julian Assange about that. You know, I mean, my goodness. Ask the hundreds of January 6th people locked up because they strolled into the Capitol, right? I mean, there's so many examples of them taking authoritarian, anti-democratic action, right?
Americans.
Yeah, so much about free speech, they had to ban my book criticizing her from Amazon.
Our country with all my heart. Everywhere I go, in everyone I meet, I see a nation that is ready to move forward. Ready.
No, I thought we were going to move backwards.
In the
Empty platitudes.
that is America. I see an America where we hold fast to the fearless belief that built our nation and inspired the world. That here,
Empty platitudes. Empty platitudes.
anything is possible.
Empty platitudes.
Is out of reach. An America where we care for one another, look out for one another, and recognize that we have so much more in common than what separates us.
Empty platitudes. Empty platitudes.
None of us has to fail for all of us to succeed. And that in unity there is strength.
Meaningless platitudes.
Opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is.
Wow. Yeah, this is the best part, right? You know, I mean, that's what Donald Trump and all of them are. They're disrespecting the country, right? They're saying that this country is bad. Well, they should move to another country if they don't like it here, right? You know, they should just move to another country. They're disrespecting our country. They're running down our freedom. They're hippies spitting on our troops, right? I mean, this is a Bush speech. This is a Bush speech, folks. This is a George W. Bush speech. She loves NATO. She hates Iran. She loves Israel. She hates Russia. She would never talk to North Korea. And the people who disagree with her are always running down our country. They're running down. They're disagreeing. They're questioning things. They're saying America's not number one. Well, we are number one. We're the greatest country in the world. And we're going to keep building military bases. We're going to have huge military bases all over the world. And don't disagree with us. And oh, man.
Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You show them who you are.
All right. This is lacking in any real substance except for neoconservatism.
And the world, who we are and what we stand for. Freedom, opportunity, compassion, dignity, fairness, and endless possibilities. We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world.
This is just neocon podium pounding.
Children and our grandchildren and all those who sacrificed so dearly for our freedom and liberty. We must be worthy of this moment. It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, guided by optimism and faith, to fight for this country we love, to fight for the ideals we cherish,
Blah, blah, blah,
and to
blah, 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 blah.
uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American.
Blah, 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 blah. So much airtime filled up with meaningless crap. I mean, this is bad.
So let's get out there. Let's fight for it. Let's get out there. Let's vote for it. And together, let us write the next great chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
So there you go, right? How many times did she mention sexual assault? The weird thing about her dad, neoconservatism, Donald Trump is a big traitor who needs to move to another country if he's denigrating our freedom. How dare he meet with North Korea? She'll keep piling weapons into Israel. She'll keep piling weapons into Ukraine. She's, vote. Donald Trump might jail people who disagrees with him while she jails people who disagrees with them. Oh, while she was a prosecutor imprisoning low-income people and destroying low-income people's lives. Oh, she was really just fighting for the downtrodden the whole time. Sexual assault, rape, sexual assault. Oh my God, what the hell was that we just listened to? Anyway, I figured I owed it to you all to debunk the Kamala Harris speech. So yeah, that was my reaction based on my unique knowledge of Kamala Harris.